The Telegraph has been forced to apologise to a former Corbyn advisor for defaming her in an article written by a former Labour MP. A statement in the corrections and clarifications section read, "In an article, Rachel Riley deserves every bit of compensation for the hard left abuse she's endured. On the 23rd of December 2021, written by Ian Austin, we suggested that Laura Murray, a former staff member at the Labour Party, was an, quote, anti-Jewish racist and of the vile anti-Semitism of Corbyn's Labour, who had been stood up to by Rachel Riley during a recent court case. These allegations were and are untrue. We accept that there was and is no basis to suggest that Ms. Murray is anti-Semitic. On the contrary, the court heard in unchallenged evidence that Ms. Murray devoted significant time and energy to confronting and challenging anti-Semitism within the Labour Party while she was employed there. The Telegraph and Ian Austin apologised to Ms. Murray. We have agreed to pay her substantial damages." The Telegraph has, we understand, paid £40,000 in damages to Laura Murray. And if you recognise Ian Austin's name, it's perhaps because he went from being a Labour MP to being a prominent campaigner against the party at the 2019 general election.
It's really come to something when people like us have to say that we think Jeremy Corbyn is, look, I think he's unfit to lead the Labour Party. I think his leadership of the Labour Party has been a disgrace. And I think he's completely unfit to lead our country as well.
It's really come to something when people like us, even people like us, say don't vote Labour. Now we know people like us, in that instance, meant people who are willing to smear people as anti-Semites without any evidence. In fact, when there's a lot of evidence to the contrary that this is someone who was actually very committed to tackling anti-Semitism, who Ian Austin was more than happy to dismiss as an anti-Jewish racist in the Telegraph. Even people like us, what a shock that someone like Ian Austin couldn't vote for a Jeremy Corbyn-led Labour Party. This is someone who is just so insincere, and as we can see here, very, very willing to smear people. Aaron, we're going to go through the context of the original Ian Austin article, because that's also interesting, an interesting legal case between Laura Murray and, in that case, Rachel Riley. But first, I want your thoughts on this apology from the Telegraph and from Ian Austin.
They've done what they've had to do, Michael. It was an open and shut case. If they'd not apologised, it would have gone to a court. They probably wouldn't have had to pay more in terms of what Laura Murray would have received, but the legal expenses would have been into the hundreds of thousands of pounds. So they had no choice. In no way was it meant, and that's why I believe, Michael, it's behind a paywall. I wouldn't really put much faith in the idea of Ian Austin being particularly sorry.
Not going to give him a rethink, is it, of the way he behaves? Like, oh, maybe I should reassess, maybe I should stop calling people anti-Semites so easily. As I say, let's look at the original case, which Ian Austin's initial article in December was referring to. It puts this current one in context. In that instance, Laura Murray had lost a libel case, that time against Countdown celebrity Rachel Riley. And this was a pretty odd case. We'll go through the background. So what you need to know, on the 3rd of March 2019, Corbyn was attacked and egged by a man in a North London mosque. The attacker would go on to get 28 days jail time. He was motivated by anger that MPs were holding up Brexit. On the day that attack happened, Rachel Riley tweeted this. So she's quote tweeting an old post from Owen Jones referring to BNP leader Nick Griffin being egged. Owen's tweet read, "Oh, I think an egg was thrown at him actually. I think sound life advice is, if you don't want eggs thrown at you, don't be a Nazi. Seems fair to me." Rachel Riley tweets, "Good advice." In response to that tweet, Laura Murray, then working for Jeremy Corbyn, said, "Today, Jeremy Corbyn went to his local mosque for Visit My Mosque Day and was attacked by a Brexiteer. Rachel Riley tweets that Corbyn deserves to be violently attacked because he is a Nazi. This woman is as dangerous as she is stupid. Nobody should ever engage with her, ever." Now, what's weird about this case is that Laura Murray's tweet is not an unreasonable reading of Rachel Riley's one by any measure whatsoever. And in fact, this is something that even the judge recognised. In his ruling, he said there is a clear element of provocation in the good advice tweet, in the sense that the claimant must have readily appreciated that the meaning of the good advice tweet was ambiguous and could be read as suggesting, at least, that Jeremy Corbyn deserved to be egged because of his political views. But the reason Murray lost the case was that she hadn't linked to Rachel Riley's original tweet and therefore didn't give readers of her tweet the chance to see that her interpretation, so this is Laura Murray's interpretation, was just one of many. The judge said of Murray, "I am satisfied that the defendant acted honestly. She made a mistake in the defendant's tweet by not including the good advice tweet." For not linking to Rachel Riley's tweet, Laura had to pay £10,000 in damages to Rachel Riley. But that is relatively small fry because Murray also has to pay Riley's legal fees, which are understood to be in excess of £1 million. So, Aaron, we're celebrating the fact that Laura Murray has got some justice in the case of Ian Austin, calling her without any evidence an anti-Jewish racist. But in this previous libel case, or from this previous libel case, she owes Rachel Riley £1 million. And that's for, or Rachel Riley's lawyers at least, £1 million. And that's for a tweet which the judge himself recognised was an understandable and, in fact, obvious interpretation of what Rachel Riley had said. But he said, given that there were other interpretations of that tweet, then she has to pay £1 million. I mean, what does this tell us about Britain's libel laws?
They're very, very odd, and you really shouldn't put any truck with them. And when people say that, oh, you should prosecute a libel case against this person, it's not quite that simple. As I have found out, Michael, I've been on both sides of this. I've had numerous threats from people saying they're going to go after me with libel. One was Lindsay Crosby years ago. I ignored it because I was entirely on the right. Nothing happened. They just throw out letters just to raise the costs. Disincentivize criticism of them on public fora from people like me. Not massive followings, but significant followings, and it's out there in the public. It's a strange one because, like you say, what Ian Austin had done with the Telegraph was far worse than what Laura Murray had done to Rachel Riley. I didn't know the £1 million figure with regards to costs. I thought it was close to about £500,000. I mean, equally bad. You can correct me if I'm wrong, Michael, but at the moment, Laura Murray is trying to appeal that. She might not have the right to appeal, in which case, obviously, she will have to pay those costs. That's the best of my understanding of that right now. Now, here's what's really interesting with regards to the Laura Murray case with Rachel Riley. As I understand it, again, lots of caveats here, because we don't want to be sued by anybody. The lawyer representing Rachel Riley has a form of insurance, which means that on the downside, they can never really lose. So you have lots of positive incentives to follow these cases. You can make money. You can win for your client, which is great. But of course, for us mere mortals, a negative incentive is, well, if you lose, you're going to have to pay a bill of hundreds of thousands of pounds for legal costs, not just for yourself, but also your opponent. And Rachel Riley's lawyer has a form of insurance which basically insulates him from a lot of that downside. It's quite a unique arrangement. I would quite like to write about it for NovaraMedia.com, but again, some things can be legally quite difficult. So on this particular matter, yes, British libel law is appalling, and there's a reason why you have oligarchs from around the world doing legal tourism, seeking to have their day in court here in Britain, because libel law is far more in favour of the millionaires, the billionaires, and the oligarchs in this country than in somewhere like the United States, where you have a statutory right to freedom of speech. So we have very, very backwards laws in this case. Lawfare is an incredibly powerful tool for reactionaries and conservatives. And like you say, what a lesson when Laura Murray wins a case, which was far bigger, and yet she could still be hundreds of thousands of pounds down. I hope it won't come to that. I hope she wins an appeal. But a good analogy for libel law, Michael, is you have the libel law in the middle. You have a cow being pulled from both sides, and the lawyer's just milking it. there are really no winners. Even in the case of Rachel Riley versus Laura Murray, the real winner is the lawyer. So yeah, a very ugly part of English law, English and Welsh law, and it needs to change. And it's certainly not in favour of the left.
I understand from people quite close to it is in excess of £1 million. That's what they're expecting at the moment. I understand that Laura Murray is, she's attempting an appeal, but hasn't yet been granted the right to an appeal. So once you're granted the right to appeal, then you have, essentially a new court case. So that isn't happening yet. The points you raised, though, are important, that it's not going to help the left. And I think the reasons are sort of numerous. And the real problem with libel law is that, unlike, in criminal law, there's no consideration by the judge of the income or the assets of the person who is being told to pay those fees. There's no cap on those fees. And there's no legal aid. So if you get accused of libel, either you have to pay all of your own legal fees and then potentially pay £1 million of your very rich, person who's taking you to court, or you have to concede at the very beginning. And that's why so many people concede at the very beginning. And you're in a complete catch-22 if they will only settle with you if you, cough up 10 grand. You don't have 10 grand, so you have to actually go to court. At the end of that court case, you end up owing, some high-flying lawyer £1 million. All it does is weight sort of our media environment and our social media environment towards the super wealthy who can afford to play these games, because no one else really can.